The NeverEnding Story was released in 1984 and was directed by Wolfgang Petersen and stars Barrett Oliver, Noah Hathaway, and Tam Stronach, and is based on the fantasy novel of the same name by Michael Ende, and follows a boy who happens upon a magical book that tells of a young warrior who is given the task of stopping the Nothing, a dark force from engulfing the Wonderland world of Fantasia. The NeverEnding Story was one of those early fantasy films I had always heard about, but had never had the chance to watch when I was younger. I knew about it, and I'm certain I had seen clips of it here and there, but it wasn't until a few years ago that I finally got to sit down and watch it for myself, and I am so glad I did, because The NeverEnding Story is one of the most imaginative and pure children's films that I have ever seen. I really enjoy this era of fantasy films where we got movies like this, The Dark Crystal, and even films like The Black Cauldron. Each of these films added an aura of darkness to their worlds in films that were mostly aimed for children, but were intended to be enjoyed by all. The NeverEnding Story is a dark and even bleak film to watch, but it also has moments of fun and adventure, and I think challenges its viewers in ways some modern fantasies aimed for children just don't. I've been wanting to talk about this film for some time now, but with the recent news of the passing of Wolfgang Petersen, I thought now would be the perfect time to talk about what I consider to be his masterwork, The NeverEnding Story. The NeverEnding Story, of course, started out as a book written by Michael Ende and initially released in 1979 in Germany before eventually getting an English translation in 1983. The story became a popular one in Germany, and by the early 80s it was optioned off to be made into a feature film. Michael Ende was initially very optimistic about a film adaptation of his popular book, and even worked as a script advisor with Wolfgang Petersen to adapt the story to the big screen. However, Ende would eventually grow troubled by the way things were moving with the film, believing Petersen, who served as the film's writer and director, to have made changes to the script without consulting him, and believed the film was beginning to deviate heavily from his own work, that he requested the production either be halted or the film's title be changed. When the producers did neither of these things, he sued the production company, but ultimately lost the case. Ende would go on to call the film a gigantic melodrama of kitsch, commerce, plush, and plastic. This always seems to be a problem that arises when any author's work is adapted to the screen, and Ende's reaction is very typical, but little would he know how successful the adaptation of his work would end up being. Early into production, it was decided that the film would only be adapting the first half of the novel, which I find a very interesting move, especially when looking at modern-day adaptations that split the stories in half, and you really feel like you're only getting half the story, and the climax of the first part never feels earned. That is not the case here with The NeverEnding Story, which makes the midpoint feel like the definitive ending to the story. As for the production itself, The NeverEnding Story would go on to be one of the most expensive films produced outside the US, and one of the most expensive film productions in Germany at the time, costing the equivalent of 27 million US dollars. Much of this is due to director Wolfgang Petersen's own perfectionism, as he would push for 40-some takes on each scene, as opposed to the typical 5 to 10 takes on most big-budgeted films. This caused the budget for the film to inflate drastically, as a 3-month shoot turned into a full year. As it's been brought up, the film was a German production, but was released in the US at the time through the use of an English dub. The dialogue was filmed in German and later redubbed into English during post-production. The giant Falkor puppet that was used for the film ended up being a massive 43 feet long, made from airplane steel and with the head alone weighing 200 pounds. When the film was given an American release, Steven Spielberg was asked to help bring it over and edit it for the American audience. So Spielberg, who at the time was already a household name with films such as Jaws, Indiana Jones, and E.T., began an editing process that would cut the original German version of the film by 7 minutes, tightening the film and pacing to make it more accessible for an English-speaking audience. The score for the film was done by Klaus Dollinger, while the English theme song was written by Giorgio Moroder with lyrics with Keith Forsey and performed by English pop singer Lamal. The song went on to be a major hit and is still enjoyed and recognized instantly as a classic 80s track, eventually even appearing most recently in the 3rd season of Stranger Things. The film would go on to be very successful at the box office as well, grossing $100 million worldwide, and though reviews for it at the time ranged from average to positive, the lasting legacy of the film has given it status as a classic. I loved The NeverEnding Story as soon as I first started watching it. When you start the film, you're just blasted with that 80s soundtrack and that Lamal song, and you just instantly know you're about to have a good time. But watching the film the 2 times that I have now, I'm still taken aback most by the maturity in which Petersen tells this story. From the opening scene with Bastian and his father, you already see the distance that is between them. Bastian's mother has recently passed away, and he's been unable to get past it, even slacking on his schoolwork and escaping to the only place he feels safe, his mind. This is the only scene in the entire film with the dad, but he leaves such a lasting impression. It doesn't end there either. The seriousness that the conflict of the film is given, the nothing is going around Fantasia and destroying everything in its way, is given serious weight and importance. When the people gather outside the ivory tower, you really feel the weight of the situation. This extends to scenes such as the Swamp of Sadness, with the scene that broke everyone's hearts, the death of Atreyu's horse Artax. But my favorite scene of the film has to be the confrontation between our hero, Atreyu, and the villain, Gamork, who works with the Nothing. They have this conversation just before their fight that really focuses on the themes of the movie and is filled with so much heavy dialogue that I don't have time to go over it all here. Something that this film discusses that I really like is the idea that the reader of books seemingly takes on the persona of the protagonist they're reading about. Early in the film, when Bastian, in an attempt to escape from his bullies, finds himself in a bookshop where he finds the NeverEnding Story, the bookshop owner tells Bastian that when he reads books, he becomes the characters in the books. But once the story is over, he remains just a boy. However, through the NeverEnding Story, Bastian can be the main character of his own story forever. So when watching the film, I think it's important to see Bastian as not only himself, but Atreyu as well. There's a great moment later on in the film when Atreyu looks into a mirror and actually sees his reflection as Bastian. I'm not saying that Atreyu is Bastian. He is still his own character, but Bastian is projecting himself onto Atreyu and becoming the character that he is, also molding into his own. Before we go any farther, I want to briefly mention how much I love the look of this film. This is a gorgeous looking film. From the production design to the special effects, the sets and miniatures are so well realized and have this old world and otherworldly quality to them that makes them stand out. It really fits with the dark fantasy look the film is going for. The matte paintings as well are beautiful, but the effects are also fantastic. Rockbiter in particular feels so large and real, and watching him just leaves me in wonder as to how they even got him made. I also love the look of Falkor, the Luck Dragon, although I will say the animatronics on him leave a bit to be desired, but I'm still still just taken away by the imagination of the film, and some of my favorite moments in the film are when we are just able to live in this world. The first scene in Fantasia is a great example of this. We get introduced to Rockbiter and some others as they discuss the emergence of the Nothing, and it is given so much weight and gravitas, but we also get a glimpse into how this world itself works, and it makes me wish we had more scenes like that. The music for the film is also stellar, and I don't mean just the Lamal song, which is great in its own right, but the music done by Klaus Dollinger is able to capture every emotion and add so much color to the world overall that I think it's one of the best soundtracks made for a fantasy film. Now, there are some things that don't necessarily hold up. Things like, as I mentioned before, Falcor's puppet is not the best. The rear screen projection can look jarring and fake at times. The stereotypical 80s bullies in the film. But all of these serve as minor nitpicks in a film that is ultimately about a lot more than those small problems. And with that, let's talk about the climax of the film itself. The NeverEnding Story for me is a textbook example of how to do a perfect climax. There's no big climactic fight with a bad guy. It's all just two people sitting and talking, and it is more about the characters than anything else. At the end, Atreyu makes it to the ivory tower to find the childlike empress to try to save Fantasia, and the book begins to break the fourth wall as the childlike empress acknowledges Bastian as the only one that can save them from the Nothing. It's then that Bastian claims he will do what he dreams and saves Fantasia. We then see a fantastic scene where Bastian sits alone with the childlike empress as she entrusts him with a single grain of sand to rebuild Fantasia with. I love this whole sequence from a visual standpoint, and it leads to the highest high of the film where everything is made right and Fantasia is saved at last, and it seems that Bastian can move on from the place he was at the beginning of the film. The NeverEnding Story is a perfect film. It challenges its audience but doesn't suffer in bogging the film down with self-importance. It's entertaining, happy, sad, and thought-provoking. There's a lot of things I noticed in this film, particularly in the dialogue, that I just do not have the time to discuss here. It's definitely a film worth checking out for its pure imagination, great characters, acting, soundtrack, and cinematography, and I think it truly is Wolfgang Petersen's masterpiece. So, with all that said, I'm going to give The NeverEnding Story a 9 out of 10. Well, guys, I want to thank you once again for watching this review. I highly recommend The NeverEnding Story if you have never checked it out. Please do. It is definitely worth your time. Also, if you've made it to the end here, I'm still asking for opinions on the new setup for my reviews. I want to know if this is something I should continue on with, going into a little bit of the history of each film I discussed before going straight into the review. Please let me know, and as always, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to the channel, and stay positive.